Hello and welcome to Journalist Hangout UK, the show where we discuss issues both African and worldwide, which are affecting the continent. And we look at how those issues are seen at home and in the African diaspora. I'm Effervescent and I'm pleased to welcome our panel, Buiswa Ngombongwana, broadcaster, Io Johnson, journalist and specialist in African affairs, Lanre Akinola, editor of African Business. And joining us by Skype, Lape Banjo, political and current affairs reporter based in Nigeria. Welcome everyone. Thank you for joining us. So, Buhari and Trump. From Buhari, the word that we've heard, first of all, security.
The action by United States in trying to see the end of ISIS has helped us a lot, because the Boko Haram in Nigeria at one time made a statement that they were loyal to ISIS. Now that ISIS have virtually gone with the help of the United States, we are very grateful for that. And we are sure that we are stabilizing the situation of security in Nigeria.
Buiswa, that left us in no doubt about the importance that Nigeria places on its security alliance with the United States. What did you make of the visit and the comments that came from
Well, you know, whenever there are any kind of official diplomatic gatherings, anyone with any level of discernment, I would suggest, understand that people are those two individuals are going through the motions of letting the world know what their top line agenda is at this point in time. And for Buhari, it's to win the next election and bring peace, you know, to Nigeria, something that hasn't been achieved in over 50 years, I would say. So I don't know how an injection of money from the USA will make that much difference to the underlying issues, which have caused Boko Haram to actually be a stain on Nigeria's legacy. But from Trump's point of view, those comments he made that were negative about African countries and others, calling them, excuse my language, I will have to repeat what he said, shithole countries.
Allegedly said, yeah?
No, he did actually say that, loud and clear, you know, using his own media mechanism. So for him, there is a bit of an element of, hey, look, I may call your countries shithole countries, but at the end of the day, I'm willing to engage with you. But what annoyed me from the discussions, the little I've been able to see, is that Trump says he's looking for a level playing field. I don't understand how that term, he dares to use that term in the context of 21st century politics and any African nation and its relationship to the USA. So to me, I'm sorry to say, it looks like Buhari went there on a bootlicking mission.
Lanre, Buiswa was reflecting what many people on the African continent feel, which is a hostility towards Trump and a resentment for the way he's talked about African countries. Can a nice meeting like this and fluffy words really paper over those cracks?
In Nigeria, Trump is actually quite popular. So there's one poll that's been taken on Trump and what people think about him in world affairs. And Nigeria is second only to the Philippines with a positive view of Trump at 58%, which incidentally is only 5% less than Barack Obama. So it's not true that everyone hates Trump, but yes, of course, his politics are a fairly unique brand. By now, people should really know what Donald Trump is about, and tact and being polite are not in his repertoire. Yeah? So it's sort of like, okay, well, what do you expect from Donald Trump? He's not going to change. So I'm not entirely convinced, or not convinced at all, that just kind of getting upset about things he says is worth it. Also, there are bigger fish to fry here. You know, the relationship between a country like Nigeria and the US is a very important one. It's a complicated one, and it's one that you don't want to jeopardize as the head of state of Nigeria. So yes, we can look at that and say he's licking Trump's boots, but I think it would be a bit foolish to go to the White House and and try and make a ruckus and try and offend the US president, no matter who that is, and no matter what you think about him as a person.
Okay, so I mean, President Buhari is the first sub-Saharan African leader to go to the White House to meet Trump. As Lanre's pointed out, this is an important relationship for both parties, possibly for one more than the other. Do you think that this visit has added anything to that picture?
Well, firstly, these are two superpowers. I mean, you got the US, who claims to be the superpower of the world, and we got Nigeria, who also claims to be the superpower on the African continent. So yes, so it's a triumph on both leadership to come together at this junction. But yeah, you know, with Trump's track record, the way we've seen him, he looked like a bully. He's acted like a bully previously, and he's already said that the United States would always come first in any negotiation. So there lies the problem for Buhari. He's going in that turf on Trump's terms. And if there's anyone going to be bullied, it will be him, Buhari, and he might not necessarily get the better of any deals that are struck. But there were some finer moments there, because very much so Buhari needed warplanes of a certain pedigree, and the US are prepared to sell that to him, come at a huge financial cost to him, but at a huge financial gain to Trump. So, and of course, you got the agricultural sector, which is one.
We'll come back to more.
So yeah, so
there
were some good signs,
Yeah.
good and positive and negatives of the visit.
Okay, Lape, let me bring you in here. On the one hand, there's no question about Nigeria and the US being really equal partners in the context of global geopolitics at the moment. But on the other, as we were hearing, a real popularity for Trump among many people in Nigeria. What's your perspective on the ground there from Lagos?
Well, thank you for having me, Afo. I think I'm swaying a lot more to what my sister Aisha said over there, but I don't completely agree with what Lamre said. I think that poll, I don't know who they spoke to in Nigeria regarding that poll, but a lot of Nigerians don't have the same kind of feelings towards Trump here in Nigeria. I mean, in fact, there's mixed feelings. For example, a lot of people did think that Buhari's response was very, very diplomatic, and that was the best response he could do in such a tough situation in front of somebody like President Trump. However, a lot of Nigerians are kind of rattled as to the fact that he didn't defend Nigeria, and it's just not good enough, really. I mean, that was his opportunity to kind of represent Africa in a much better light, aside from diplomatic commentary. And more importantly, I think as well that Buhari didn't really say much. I mean, all he said was, I would have to remain silent regarding this. Even the international trade talks, I mean, exporting agricultural produce from America to an African country that actually in Nigeria, agriculture happens to be our second largest export after oil. So it didn't, I mean, his response is, yes, diplomatic to an extent, but didn't really make sense and weren't actually representative of what people in Nigeria think. So, I mean, to be fair, I was not impressed with any of the responses coming from President Buhari.
Thank you, Lape. And this is not just about symbolism, although on these state visits, symbolism is always a big part of the story. But there is some very practical detail here. A security situation in Nigeria which shows no signs of abating at the moment. We've had 900 killed in the last year alone. The overall figure, I've heard the figure of 20,000. This is a serious problem. The US is providing some practical assistance in hardware, as we've heard, in training, in intelligence. Visa, that can't be written off, can it? That is important.
No, absolutely not. But like I said earlier, I think the injection of money is going into the wrong area in terms of Nigeria's interests long term. Now, in the short term, it works in terms of electioneering, in terms of drama, but how effective the Nigerian military mechanism will be to utilize, how much was it, 600 million?
496 million.
496 million, a phenomenal amount of money. Now, do you trust the mechanisms within Nigerian society to utilize that money for what it was intended? And even if you do trust that, is that really the main focus for Nigeria's interest? And for me as an African, no, it's not for the long term. It might get Buhari the next election, but Nigeria will still be in exactly the same spot. 463 million richer, but no less better off.
Lapi, let me bring you back in. Visa mentioned elections. There has been some discussion about whether Trump's focus on the persecution of Christians in Nigeria, as he sees it, might help Buhari with that always contentious issue for him of the Christian vote. Do you see that playing itself out?
I don't see that playing itself out at all, actually. He's made a few media gaffes lately, referring to the youths as lazy and then, encouraging Trump's comments about Christianity and the killings. Obviously, in my opinion, Trump is trying to pander his kind of evangelical support in America, but it's causing a lot more religious divide here, which we already have enough of. And actually, in terms of insecurity as well, there's just been a recent attack in Adamawa state in the town of Mubi, and Boko Haram are, dare I say, becoming a lot more active than when Buhari actually, became president and the activity reduced. So in terms of the elections, I don't actually think he's going in the right direction in terms of garnering support out here. And especially with the religious comments as well, it's just not actually helping. There's a lot of local commentary that's been going on here about how that comment has actually caused a lot more divide. And we already have enough of that in our politics here in Nigeria.
Lanre, Trump is not known for his sophisticated understanding of African politics. He doesn't actually have African specialists in advising him on foreign policy, as we know. And comments like this, he might not even realise how divisive they can be. And we've had this attack in Mubi. We still see people being killed by Boko Haram. It's a complex situation. Is America actually alleviating it? And just a quick comment, because we are about to go to the break.
Oh, God. Is he alleviating it? Well, I mean, the security issue is a real one. And having the US involved is important. Whether or not they're effectively tackling it, we'll have to wait and see. I mean, it's not that straightforward. I hope we get back to this, because I have some things that I want to come back on.
All right, well, we'll pick up more of these important and complex issues after the break. We are going to take a quick break now, but please do join us again in a few moments. Hello and welcome back to Journalist Hangout UK. I'm Efwa Hirsch and I'm pleased to welcome back our panel, Vuiswa Nongbongwana, Ayo Johnson, Langray Akinola, and by Skype from Lagos, Lape Banjo. Welcome back, everyone. Before the break, we were talking about security, but I was struggling to restrain you all from talking about some of the other broader issues that came up in this meeting. And you were mentioning agriculture, which has been getting people quite worked up, actually. Tell us your perspective on this deal that was done regarding agricultural equipment and imports from the US.
Well, you're talking about security there, but food security is what it's all about. It's how Nigeria positioned itself to be able to feed itself, not relying on imports. And of course, this strategy Buhari has is about how he can ensure that Nigeria can actually succeed in that. But I think the deal here has been about mechanization, to do with tractors, to do with technology, to be able to facilitate the farming industry, which is not very, very good in Nigeria right now. And I think the US has said they would help them. But the question is, to what extent can China, who we already know Nigeria has a huge, good relationship with, how much they're going to bring to the fore in terms of the technology that's required. But I think this is the only sector that Nigeria has in terms of thriving, because the oil sector, as we know, has become slightly stagnant. We know the oil's flowing, but we know it's become stagnant. And financially,
I mean, oil was noticeable by its absence in this meeting. It wasn't even mentioned, as far as we know.
Well, we know that because the oil would always be there, as my colleagues would have mentioned previously. But the thing is, Nigerians know that the future is not going to be oil. The future is agriculture, and food security is key. So another security issue there.
Lape, let me bring you back in here, because when it comes to food and food imports, America has a contentious relationship across the West African sub-region. America is widely blamed by many people for killing domestic markets in rice, for example. Is there goodwill towards America when it comes to providing assistance in mechanizing agriculture? And are food imports still a very politicized and contentious area?
I mean, the way Nigeria is set up is, it's divided into the south and the north. We have the southeast and southwest, and then we have the regions in the north. Unfortunately, a lot of the farming and agriculture in the south is actually not happening as quick as it is in the north. That's just due to the mechanisms of farming. And actually now in the southern parts, especially in the southwest, a lot of the farming does need mechanical and technological help. So I don't know what Buhari's plans are with that. And maybe that might be a good way to go. However, America always wants something in return. And I think that during this meeting that a lot of the discussions were about the exchange of helicopters and so on in return for agricultural help. Here in Nigeria, I mean, the response to that has been, again, mixed. In more cases, kind of angry about the fact that, Buhari is trying to trade with our agriculture, which we consider a natural export. And it's just not a good look, really, for people out here. More importantly, I think, with regards to farming, I think it is something that we do need to talk about. As my colleague Ayo mentioned there, oil will always be there, and we are kind of stagnated in oil in Nigeria at the moment. So it is about exploring other alternatives. And the north actually do benefit a lot from farming just because of the temperature and the conditions there. So they might not actually need as much technological assistance there.
Thank you, Lape. Lamre, this is all in the context of a bigger conversation about the trade relationship between Nigeria and the US. What did you take in that respect from the meeting?
Well, look, the Trump, Donald Trump is not a very likable person, and so much attention is focused on that, that what's lost in the discussion is that actually US-Africa relations on the trade front have been fairly stable since he took over. So there are two main pillars that underpin US-Africa trade. One is something called AGOA, the Africa Growth and Opportunity Act, and the other is something called Power Africa. The first was the flagship initiative under the Bush administration, the second under Obama. Not only have both been kept, but they've been expanded under Trump. There's been no opposition whatsoever. So the idea actually is let's expand trade, and that's one thing the Trump administration has been clear about. What we need to remember here is that the United States government is not Donald Trump. It is a fairly large, set of institutions, and beyond the headlines, no one's talking about cutting Africa off. Nobody is saying, oh, we don't want to deal with them. It's the opposite. People are saying we want to do more. There's a bigger question around whether or not this policy is coherent, but that question was there long before Donald Trump.
Fuiswa, Trump has identified Nigeria and South Africa as the two kind of super players in Africa that he wants to deal with. Does he actually have an Africa policy from your perspective? We heard from Lamre about Obama and Bush's Africa policies. Trump, we know that he's pro-trade, he's a capitalist. He has never said he doesn't want to trade with Africa.
Yes.
What does he want to do? Is there anything tangible that we can actually look to?
Well, it's hard to be clear on answering that because they haven't been clear on their Africa policy. In fact, it's the non-existence of one that actually makes one look at the US relationship to Africa. And it is colonial, neo-colonial, more accurately. Let's just be real. There is no level playing field here. And for Donald Trump to use the phrase level playing field is pretty smart in diplomatic terms because we started on an uneven field already. So I'm really curious to know what concessions Buhari had to make to ensure the money keeps coming in, to build up the infrastructure level so that you can actually have decent farming opportunities. I'm just concerned about that.
Very quick comment for this. It took the Obama administration 7 years before they did something substantive on Africa. It's been less than 2 years for Trump. I'm not trying to make excuses, but we forget that it's not as though Obama was this huge champion for Africa. For years he said nothing and did nothing. So it's just like, yes, let's not be too distracted by the unpleasant nature of Donald Trump.
But also don't forget...
I think the unpleasant nature of Donald Trump, as Lamre just said, is key here. But I think what's fundamental is the choices that Africans have. And Buhari exposes that. It's a liberalized continent that's voting with its feet. So if the US administration package is not as friendly and not as exciting, the Chinese option is there. So I think that's the pressure that it brings naturally to the US, who wants to have a hold on an African continent which is already synonymous with that of China. And so I think Buhari goes there with a degree of strength on that position that Trump already knows Africa's position is what you can bring to the table.
Why did he not act like he had a position?
Yes,
well, he's a businessman.
Let's ask Lape about that. Lape, the reality is that now African countries, especially large economies like Nigeria, do have choices. And in a way, you would think that America would be the one asking for business from Buhari because they're competing with China. Is that feeding into the perceptions you were saying about how this was a bit of a deferential trip? Do you think that we're seeing that kind of negotiating power coming out in the way Buhari is conducting these meetings?
Not necessarily, actually, because even here back home, the opposition party, the PDP, have actually expressed their dismay at the way in which Buhari went there and represented Nigeria and handled the negotiations. Yes, President Trump's personality comes into play, but at the same time, we rely heavily on international support. We rely heavily on the influence of other countries, which is great. But like my colleague said there, moving away from Africa, the influence of the Chinese here and the presence of the Chinese here is a lot stronger and greater than it is of America. So the negotiations that happened in Washington still remain quite confusing, and what actually was negotiated is still quite kind of a confusion to everybody here, because the presence of the Chinese is a lot stronger, especially in the agricultural industry. So the exchange between Trump working faster, as Lanre said there, in 2 years in comparison to Barack Obama, doesn't really make a difference because America isn't actually doing much here.
Is this whole subject a distraction? I mean, we've heard there's a big credit swap that's just happened with China. These deals are going on.
Look,
how much does this actually mean?
Nuance is always hard to come by. People really underestimate the significance of nuanced analysis. And the real question about U.S.-Africa relationships, the U.S.-Africa relationship, is whether the U.S. has a coherent strategy. That has been the question for many years. And that is a question that Donald Trump has inherited. And yes, beyond the headlines, China is very much in the driving seat when it comes to geopolitical competition on the continent. Very much so, and not just in Nigeria. And for me, like, Buhari knows that. He doesn't need to go and make a scene in Washington and invite even more melodrama. He's got many priorities. One of those is, hey, I've got a debt swap deal with Beijing that I need to finalize this week, which they have, for over $2 billion, right? It's just, this is diplomacy. And I don't think Buhari has done anything particularly horrible. I don't understand the upside of going to make a scene in Washington this
Final
week.
quick word from you, Louisa, because we're almost out of time.
We may have forgotten to mention that what Buhari effectively has done is rubber-stamped officially America's military dominance in West Africa.
How did you do that?
Indirectly, obviously using African soldiers who are going to be doing the dying and the killing. Yes, because when he funds a military operation, which is what Buhari has to undertake to maintain peace, who's going to do the dying? And at what price for Nigeria's long-term future?
Well,
that's what I'm concerned
Nigerians that
about.
be flying those planes.
All right, that is going to be a discussion for another time. Thank you so much, as always, to talk about. Don't forget to follow us at RealJHUK on Facebook, Twitter, and Instagram. I'm Effa Hirsch, and from the entire team in London, goodbye. And thank you for watching Journalists Hangout UK.